So what's interesting is that many people um, are able to bifurcate their self, meaning their spirit, their inner self, from their external self. And they're frequently encouraged to do that because their outer self has issues, meaning it's not attractive, it's doesn't fully function, or there's some other issue. You've done exactly the opposite in a sense, right? Your outer self have been so attractive as to cause you challenges that you've had to overcome by relying on your inner self. I don't know, you probably don't know this, but in the opening chapter of my book, I talk extensively about my mother. And my mom and dad were involved in a really bad plane crash in 1977. My dad was killed immediately. It was the worst aviation accident in the history of Georgia. My mother suffered third-degree burns on 2/3 of her body. And she was hospitalized at Grady Memorial. Over 2/3 of her body was, like I said, third-degree burns or worse. Countless operations, amputations, grafts, et cetera. And fortunately, her face was not burned, but most of the rest of her body was. And she used to say that she couldn't give up, in part because of her kids. Thankfully, I was one of them. But she also would face all these just seemingly insurmountable problems and this incredible chronic pain from the burns.
Oh, I'm sure.
With a comment, she used to always say, this too shall pass. And so she was always getting to the next day in a way that was very admirable. She ultimately succumbed to all this, but she lived for 40 years, almost 40 years after the plane crash. But it was a brutal thing to kind of be around, and I was so grateful for her, even though as a son you occasionally get put off by your mom, but she was a fantastic strength of will and character in her own right. And what's interesting to me is how much of your comments today have really drawn in a similar way from the same strength, the power of your family, the power of your friends, the power of your kids, and how you drew strength from that. I didn't, I kind of remember my mom saying that a lot, but for me in this conversation, your language ties directly back to the things that my mom would say in a way that I probably intellectually understood it, but I couldn't really emotionally understand it the way I do today. Yeah. Now, I'm also fortunate because I have kids, through Heather, and so I have a different sense of it. But your remarks really resonate in that regard. And I think that for the people who are watching this or who are listening to it, it's really far more powerful, I think, than is given credit. It's a really, really powerful source of resolve and energy. And I think you draw on that very elegantly. So they're making a movie out of your book. Mm-hmm. When's that going to come out?
Well, it was supposed to start filming of May of 2020. So it's been on hold, but we're still, well, not me. I sold the rights to my book. So they're still in pre-production for the moment, but it's coming.
You could be one of the authors who actually stars in your own film.
It's funny. I can do a lot in front of the camera, but I'm not an actress. I could be, but I'm not. I don't like to limit myself. I don't like to put myself in a lane anymore. I was in a lane for 41 years. It's, and ironically, when I started social media, somebody that was helping me get on social media and start that journey said, you have to really pick one thing. Don't be on the board of a couple things. Don't, you're either a breast cancer survivor, or you're a motivational speaker, or you're an author, or you're this or that. And I was like, no, I'd rather not be on social media. I'm not doing this for social media. I'm doing this because this is who I am. And you're not going to put me in kind of a box. And I think in this world, we're so often labeled and put in a box. And that's why they call me the cancer disruptor. It's a title I love because I speak how I feel and I tell the truth and I'm very vulnerable about it. And not a lot of people do that as much as they should, or we would want them to.
It takes a lot of strength actually to do that.
A lot of courage.
Indeed. And how did you decide that you wanted to put yourself in that place, and you must have taken some arrows as well as, some plaudits, right?
Oh, lots. But that was okay for me because I thought about that before I published my book and before I went on this journey that I've gone on. I've lost friendships. I've lost a lot of important relationships, not a lot, but significant ones. And it was okay because I knew that the amount of people that I would save or help, was more important than that, because the reason that lost these people was because of pride and ego. And my pride and ego went out the door many years ago. I don't really care what people think of me, which is what I think people attracts people to me oftentimes, because I don't want people in my life that want something from me. There's no transaction in my life. I lived that life for a long time. And so if somebody asks me to do something for them, I do it out of the grace of my heart. I don't want anything from that. And so I think that our world, especially with social media, goes absolutely against that. So I think I'm kind of a disruptor in many ways, not just a cancer disruptor. But I think it's really important that I use my voice now, because I didn't use it for a long time.
There was a book review I was listening to a couple of days ago. It's on the New York Times bestseller list, and it's written about Stoics. And one of the comments in it that's kind of stuck with me is, we love ourselves more than others, more than anyone else. But we, I think, how do they say it? We value others' opinions more than we value our own.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I didn't love myself more than other people for a long time. I do value myself and I love myself now more than other people. But I think,
and that's exactly what's coming across. I mean, that's what
it's true though. And I don't really value other people's opinion that much anymore. I like to think that I try, but my opinion matters to me.
Yeah. And I think you have to be, so earlier, the thing that came to mind was you're a Renaissance woman, right? But I think you kind of described a version of wholeness in terms of who you are, that I think most people wouldn't be aware of. And it really, the thing that's interesting to me is one has to be an active listener with you. You don't have a choice. And it's not big. I mean, part is your story is compelling, but also you're saying important stuff.
That's a great compliment.
And then people need to listen to that, but also you got to really pay attention, because the stuff that's important, you don't need to say it twice.
Yeah.
But you're saying really important stuff, and I hope people really understand how important it is. I think there's a lot to come out of this in a very powerful way. And I'm grateful to you for that. Let me ask you one concluding question. Why Miami?
I needed a different landscape. And so in order to stop the tapes that were playing in my head for the first 2 years of my life, I needed to change what I was looking at. And so I lived in Dallas and I loved it. And I love the people, and I have incredible memories there. But, I drive down the street and that's where I did chemo. And I drive down the street and that's where I had the arm debacle. And so there was a lot of memories that I needed to kind of step back from. And so I needed to change the tapes in my head, and I needed to change the landscape. And I was lucky enough to do it. I mean, I get to look at the ocean every day, and I get to be that self-proclaimed athlete because I ride my bike and I walk to the grocery store. I don't have to get in my car and do that. And my lifestyle is better for me because I do have a fused arm and I am in chronic pain. And so for me, walking to the grocery store is much better than driving to the grocery store physically, from a physical standpoint. And so I was able to change that. And I'm very, very grateful. I've kind of rebuilt my life here, which takes a lot of courage too. It's not easy. But I think I've done a good job, and I'm happy here. I'm really happy here. It's a very peaceful place.